April 1945. After nearly 6 years of war, the Red Army stands massed on the banks of the Oder River in eastern Germany. The Nazi capital and Hitler's bunker are just 60 kilometers away, but the Nazi Party and the Wehrmacht are preparing to fight to the bitter end in the final struggle of World War II in Europe, the Battle for Berlin. The Second World War is nearing its end in Europe in April 1945, but the final chapter of the Eastern Front will prove a dramatic and bloody one. The German army, once at the gates of Moscow, is now desperately preparing for the Soviet assault on Berlin. Red Army units had reached the Oder River just 60 kilometers from the German capital back in January, but logistical issues and clearing the flanks delay the final offensive. Planners expect the operation to start in May, but Soviet leader Joseph Stalin worries the rapidly advancing Western Allies will get there first. Even though Allied Commander-in-Chief Dwight Eisenhower personally assures Stalin the Allies won't march on Berlin, Stalin doesn't trust him and orders the final attack to begin weeks ahead of schedule. The Soviet plan is for 3 fronts or army groups to converge on the Nazi capital. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Belarusian Front will break through the German positions on the Seelow Heights and strike at the heart of Berlin along the main east-west road. Marshal Ivan Konev's First Ukrainian Front will envelop the city from the south, but not necessarily enter it. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky's Second Belarusian Front will start a few days after the main assault and will protect Zhukov's northern flank. To capture the lair of the fascist beast, as Soviet propaganda refers to the city, the Red Army amasses a colossal force. 2.5 million men, including 150,000 Poles, 6,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 40,000 artillery pieces, and 7,500 aircraft. The men are experienced, but also tired from constant fighting and the rushed preparations. Facing them, the German Army Group Vistula under General Gotthard Heinrizi and part of Army Group Center under Generalfeldmarschall Ferdinand Schörner face a near impossible task. They have about 1 million men, 1,500 tanks and SPGs, 10,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 aircraft. Some of these units are capable, like Waffen-SS divisions and some panzer divisions, but many others are below strength, badly trained and organized, or Volkssturm militia of old men and a few boys. Defensive plans are also improvised. There are 3 designated defense zones at Seelow, but confusion reigns, even though the Germans' only hope is holding off the Red Army along the Oder. They don't have the strength or mobility to counter any Soviet breakthrough. On the eve of battle, soldiers on both sides draw on different motivations to fight. Many Germans fear the Soviets will take revenge for German crimes in the USSR. We have to win this war. If the others win the war, and they do to us only a fraction of what we have done in the occupied territories, there won't be a single German left in a few weeks. Others remain in the fight because of a feeling of obligation to their comrades, or because they cling to the belief in the Führer's wonder weapons, or rumors of a coming alliance with the British and Americans against the Soviets. They also fear the military police, known as chain dogs, who are responsible for discipline. Red Army troops also have a variety of motivations. Some want revenge for the destruction the Germans caused in their homeland, a feeling echoed in official statements. There will be no pity. They have sown the wind, and now they are harvesting the whirlwind. Some Soviets are also driven forward by fear of the NKVD secret police, while others are committed communists and loyal to Stalin. Both Germans and Soviets are still subject to the discipline and cohesion of their respective armies. There are few options to simply stop until the leadership structure on one side or the other decides to. On April 16, 1945, the Battle of Berlin begins with a thunderous Soviet artillery barrage along the Oder and Neisse rivers. Thousands of shells pound German positions before the Red Army begins its advance. At Seelow, the Germans have cleverly pulled back just beyond the curtain of fire and wait until it stops before reoccupying their defenses. The Soviets then switch on searchlights to blind the Germans, but instead silhouette their own troops for German gunners. Soviet units struggle uphill on the soft ground, while vehicles are easy targets on the few roads. The attack bogs down within hours. Zhukov wanted to keep his tank armies for a breakthrough push after taking the heights, but he's under immense political pressure to succeed, so he makes a mistake. He orders the tanks to advance through the infantry that has gone to ground below the heights, causing confusion, traffic jams, and even heavier losses. For 3 days, the Soviets batter their way up the Zelo heights and onto the high ground against bitter but weakening German resistance. Soviet tank crewman Sergeant Goglidze's T-34 is hit on the steep incline. A horrifying hit shook our tank. An enemy shell had hit the right side of the turret, but the German projectile only grazed the armor without managing to penetrate it. Loder Tachenko was deafened. On the left, I noticed 2 Germans with Panzerfausts in a dugout. I turned the tank to the left, added speed, and hit the Germans with the treads. Finally, on April 19th, Zhukov's units break the German lines and accelerate to the west. Further south, Konyev's artillery plan is more effective and the German defenses are weaker, so the Red Army gets across the Neisse relatively easily and then races west. German soldier Karl Pavlik is one of thousands who surrender. We had nowhere to hide. The air was full of whistling and explosions. We suffered unimaginable losses. Those who survived were rushing around in trenches and bunkers like madmen, trying to save themselves. We were speechless with terror. Stalin now allows Konyev to turn north towards the city to exploit his success, giving rise to a debate as to whether he planned for his 2 marshals to race each other for the honor of capturing the city first. Another debate will rage amongst historians about Zhukov's performance at Zelo. Some have judged he callously throws away the lives of his men while making tactical mistakes, while others emphasize that facing a prepared position on high ground under political pressure for a quick victory was bound to be bloody. Zelo Heights costs at least 33,000 Soviet lives and about 12,000 German. From April 20th, Hitler's birthday, both main Soviet fronts are racing towards Berlin, and their task now is to encircle it. Soviet progress is slowed somewhat by thick forests and swamps, by logistical difficulties of bringing up enough fuel, and by disorganized but often fierce German resistance, especially teams armed with the handheld anti-tank weapons known as Panzerfausts. Both Zhukov and Konyev urge ever more speed, and Red Army units soon reach the suburbs of Berlin. From April 21st, Soviet artillery begins to shell the city's center. As the front disintegrates, German command and control also breaks down. The Soviets capture the German Army and Wehrmacht headquarters bunker at Wünsdorf, and Berlin loses touch with General Helmut Weidling's 56th Corps for several days as it retreats from Zelo. The confusion is so bad that 2 separate German commanders sentence Weidling to death, but he then ends up commander of Berlin's overall defense. On April 22nd, Hitler has a near breakdown in his bunker, screaming at his generals and admitting that the war is lost, though he soon recovers his spirits amidst unrealistic plans for decisive counterattacks from all directions by Generals Steiner, Wenck, and Busse. Meanwhile, many top Nazis flee the city in the so-called Flight of the Pheasants. Himmler, Göring, Dönitz, and Speer all take the chance to leave, and Himmler even secretly offers to negotiate with the Western Allies through the World Jewish Congress and the Red Cross, but the British and Americans refuse. German civilians, though, are caught in the crossfire. Frieda Schulze, a resident of Radeland, south of Berlin, is unsure what to do when she sees a column of friendly troops. We quickly fled into the woods together, not knowing where we should go. During the night, German infantry went past us in a westerly direction. We asked one of the Radelanders whether we should come with them, and got the reply, "You must be tired of life." On April 24th, Soviet forces cut off parts of 2 German armies east of Berlin in what becomes known to the Germans as the Halbe Pocket, called the Frankfurt-Guben Group by the Red Army. Between 80 and 200,000 troops of the 9th and 4th Panzer Armies are trapped in an ever-tightening cauldron with limited food and ammunition and under constant air attack. 9th Army Commander Theodor Busse and General Wenck defy Hitler's orders to relieve Berlin and instead push towards each other to save as many of their men as they can, while leaving civilians in the pocket and in Berlin to their fates. German forces in the pocket try to break out towards the west with the few remaining armored vehicles in the lead. Thousands of fearful civilians join the ragged columns, which often leave their wounded behind, even driving over them on the narrow forest roads in the crush to escape. On April 28th, about 25,000 Germans managed to push through the overextended Soviet lines south of Berlin and dash across 50 kilometers of Soviet-held territory to join with Wenck's army. Most lie dead in the pocket, one of the bloodiest episodes of the Berlin operation. While the Halbe drama is playing out, on April 25th, the Red Army closes the ring around Berlin and meets up with American forces on the Elbe River at Torgau. While the Berlin operation unfolds, both armies also continue to commit war crimes on a mass scale. German officers in the SS, regular army and military police summarily execute thousands of their own troops for alleged cowardice. German soldiers also loot freely from stores and warehouses and deliberately massacre Soviet and Italian prisoners of war and forced laborers. Nazi officials also kill scores of anti-Nazi German political prisoners in a final act of revenge. Not far from Berlin, the concentration camp at Sachsenhausen and the all-female camp at Ravensbrück witness further crimes. SS guards lead tens of thousands on death marches, intending to drown the victims once they reach the Baltic Sea. The guards shoot anyone who cannot continue, while others die of exhaustion. Thousands of corpses line the roads, though the Soviets do liberate several hundred survivors who were left behind in the camps. Camilla Flück survives Ravensbrück. 2 or 3 weeks after the liberation, a Russian general came to our sickbay. He made a fine, educated, and intelligent impression, and I was enthused by his beautiful Russian. An interpreter translated. He said, among other things, he was pleased he could bring us news of freedom, and they will do everything to get us healthy and to help us forget the horrible time of fascism. We were moved to tears, and so was he. The Red Army commits mass war crimes as well, most of which the officers and higher-ups tolerate or even encourage. For example, they round up liberated Soviet prisoners of war and send them straight into the fighting without proper care or training, resulting in many deaths. Soviet troops loot from shops and homes, often sending back household items to their families, but also keeping status items like wristwatches. They regularly kill German civilians, but the most widespread crime is rape, an act Stalin refers to as, quote, a trifle. Historians estimate that Soviet troops raped between 100,000 and 130,000 women in Berlin, some 10,000 of whom commit suicide as a result. Some of the victims are not Germans, but forced laborers from Eastern Europe, even from the Soviet Union itself. Some Soviet courts do belatedly sentence some offenders, but most crimes go unpunished. Though Soviet and later Russian official histories deny the scale of the rapes, an April 1945 report by Commissar Vladimir Semyonov admits the problem. In spite of the order of the War Council regarding the change of behavior towards the Germans, there are still many cases of the rape of women. The motivations behind the sexual violence vary. A desire to humiliate the defeated enemy, group pressure to prove one's masculinity or fit in, poor army discipline, or revenge for the destruction and mass rapes committed by German troops in the Soviet Union. Many of these crimes committed by the Soviets and Germans take place inside the city, which from April 25th is surrounded and under siege. Despite Hitler's continued fantasies about imminent counterattacks by armies no longer following his orders, there is no hope of relief for Berlin. The German defenses are even more disorganized than those on the Oder River were 10 days ago. Makeshift barricades block city streets, and the Germans place their hopes on defending the local railway ring around the heart of the city. They've divided the city into zones to organize the defense, and they spread out their best remaining units, including foreign Waffen-SS troops from Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and France, to shore up the poor-quality Volkssturm, police, and scratch alarm battalions. The Red Army's objective is the Central Z Zone, which includes most government headquarters, including Hitler's bunker. It also contains the empty and burned-out ruin of the Reichstag, once Germany's parliament, but now a symbol of the Nazi regime in Soviet propaganda. The city is mostly in ruins due to British and American bombing, which provides positions for the defense and obstacles for the attackers, as do the many waterways in the city. The Germans also plan to use the heavy guns on 3 giant flak towers in a ground defense role. but General Weidling has no more than 100,000 men and just 60 tanks left. There are still 2.7 million civilians in the city as well, as the authorities do not make any effort to evacuate them. Despite the crushing Soviet advantages in numbers and firepower, taking the core of a city like Berlin will not be easy. Red Army interpreter Yelena Rzhevskaya is struck by how massive the city is. It was a huge, unfamiliar city. The smoke of the fires obscured its outlines, and the blocks of ruined buildings gave the city an eerie appearance. Almost 6 years ago, a criminal invasion of Europe, unprecedented in cruelty, began from here. The war has returned. Urban warfare in this environment requires special tactics, similar to those General Vasily Trikov learned during the fighting in Stalingrad. Smaller teams consisting of infantry, combat engineers, flamethrowers, light artillery, anti-tank guns, and self-propelled guns work together to blast and infiltrate their way forward, block by block. As the Red Army closes in on the Z Zone, it fights for every canal, railway station, and city block. The fighting is bloody and chaotic. German soldier Helmut Altner has a narrow escape. Suddenly it became silent. Even the enemy's infantry fire stopped. We stuck our heads above the edge of the trench and ducked back down. Right in front of the trench stood a Russian tank, like a dark monster just drawing its breath before devouring us. But then we were spellbound. The hatch opened and a head appeared. "Don't shoot," sounded suddenly through the silence, and we held our breath. "Soldiers, there is no point. Do you want to die in the final hours of the war, which you have lost?" The hatch closed, the motor roared, and the tank clanked off. Most encounters do not end so peacefully. For the German civilians caught in the fighting, the experience is hellish. Many flee to the relative safety of the flak towers or shelters under large buildings like the Anhalter train station. Hygienic conditions are inhuman, and many do not make it out. Officially, it's called a shelter. We called it a cave, an underworld, a catacomb of fear, a mass grave. In the Soviet-controlled areas, the Red Army distributes much-needed food and reconnects utilities to provide water and prevent the spread of disease. Konev and Zhukov's forces eventually meet. After some friendly fire incidents, Konev's front is withdrawn from the city and sent south. If there ever was a race to the Reichstag, Zhukov wins it, and his forces now enter the Z Zone. They storm the Reichstag in a bloody and senseless 3-day struggle, taking heavy losses to fly the red banner over the building in time for May 1st, International Workers' Day. In the final days, Hitler constantly demands news of imagined counterattacks led by Steiner and Wenck, but there's none. Hitler and Eva Braun marry in the bunker, then kill themselves. There is no evidence for the conspiracy theory that they escaped to Argentina. German civilians and soldiers are often in shock at the news of their Führer's marriage and death. Journalist Margrethe Boveri is bitter. I'm curious to know how it really was. Few people seem to realize that this man deliberately destroyed as much as he could. Believing in victory, they believed he believed too. He did not. Admiral Karl Dönitz becomes president, though he is in Flensburg far to the north. Joseph Goebbels becomes chancellor, and after failed negotiations with the Soviets on May 1st, he and his wife kill themselves and their children, as did thousands of others. Several groups of desperate Germans now try to break out with the help of remaining SS units. German tank commander Georg Diaz is among them. Our breakout was in the direction of Nauen-Oranienburg. We traveled through towns, often under murderous Russian fire. Anyone wounded had to be left behind. Many of them begged for a hand grenade or a bullet in the head. We could only give out hand grenades as long as there were any left to help these boys. An ambulance truck driving ahead of me with 2 or 3 rows of stretchers was hit. The wounded clung to the sides, screaming. It was a terrible sight. Diaz survives the war and remains an unrepentant Nazi. Traudl Junge, an assistant in the Führerbunker, also makes it out and goes on to write the book upon which the film Downfall is mostly based. Most, though, including Hitler's private secretary Martin Bormann, are killed. Finally, on May 2nd, 1945, General Weidling surrenders the ruined city and the remnants of his forces to the Red Army, and the Battle of Berlin is over. The outcome of the Berlin operation is never in doubt, but the final Soviet victory comes at great cost. In just over 2 weeks of fighting, the Red Army suffers at least 80,000 killed. German losses are harder to estimate, but may have been as many as 100,000 military and between 20 and 100,000 civilian dead. With Hitler dead and the hammer and sickle flying above the German capital, surrender is a matter of time, and the Second World War in Europe ends on May 8-9. The Soviet Union puts up prominent memorials throughout the city, which also serve as a reminder to later Western Allied occupation forces in the context of the Cold War. For Soviets, it is the culmination of the Great Patriotic War, the final victory and retribution against Nazi Germany. For the Holocaust survivors and freed forced laborers and POWs, it is the end of a nightmare. For German citizens, it's the beginning of a tense period of occupation that will ultimately last 45 years. The Battle of Berlin is one of the biggest battles of the Second World War, and yet, in documentaries, it's rarely given the time it deserves. Even in this 20-plus minute video, I was only able to give you a glimpse of this colossal struggle. If you do want to learn more about the Battle of Berlin, though, you should check out our 4.5-hour, 18-part documentary series, 16 Days in Berlin. Covering the entire battle day by day with detailed maps, animations, expert interviews, and more, 16 Days in Berlin is the most detailed documentary about this battle ever produced. With our uncompromising portrayal using authentic combat footage, we couldn't upload it to YouTube because of their advertising guidelines. So where can you watch 16 Days in Berlin in 4K resolution? On Nebula, a streaming service we're building together with other creators. If you go to nebula.tv/realtimehistory, you can watch 16 Days in Berlin, our other original documentaries, Rhineland 45 and Red Adams, as well as a host of other smart creators. And all that for just $36 for an entire year. Nebula is also a great gift, by the way. Just go to gift.nebula.tv/realtimehistory to gift an entire year to family and friends, even if they already have an account. Whether you watch Nebula on your own or give it to someone else, you're supporting us here at Real Time History directly. As usual, you can find all the sources for this video in the video description below. For more on the late stages of the Second World War, check out our videos about the Battle of the Rhine and the Battle of Japan. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only history channel that could go for some currywurst for lunch right now.